I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Arcane Mark, Design Diaries, Anatomy of a Variant Rule. We've done some other anatomies in the past, anatomies of a class, anatomy of a magic item, anatomy of a spell. But today we're going to be talking about something that has a slightly more varied set of anatomies. And of course, Leshy Butt pings right after.
Well, you know Leshy Butt's gonna do that.
Which is a variant rule.
So one thing that's important to distinguish here is variant rules aren't just like, you know, little subsystems or other systems within the game.
That's right. We did Anatomy of a Victory Point subsystem.
We've done that before. Variant rules are more about picking up some aspect of the game and then making a variant, changing that aspect of what already exists. So why don't we talk a bit about some of the variant rules that already exist in the Game Mastery Guide, and then how that pertains to...
We won't go into them in too much detail, but the variant rules chapter is chapter 4 of the Game Mastery Guide. I wrote all of chapter 4 of the Game Mastery Guide except Deep Backgrounds, which Ron Lundeen wrote up those deep background rules. And so when it comes to variant rules, Pathfinder 2nd Edition includes a lot, just straight out in the Game Master Guide. Ability score variants for using different ability scores or adjusting them at a different rate of speed. Alignment variants for removing alignment or using incremental alignments. Deep backgrounds for replacing the background with some D100 tables with multiple options. Variants on feats and features to make you gain feats faster, such as the free archetype variant or the dual class variant, or the ancestry paragon where you gain more ancestry feats, or slower or not at all, like removing skill feats to make them more simplified. There's also level 0 characters, a variant that lets you play a character before level 1. Magic item variants to change it so that some of magic items features go into great craftsmanship, or just that some of the bonuses progress automatically without magic items. Proficiency without level, where you do not add your level to your proficiency modifier, more similar to how it's done in D&D 5e, although not exactly the same, since they do add 2 plus a quarter of their level, but 0 is closer to 2 plus a quarter of your level, especially since that 2 kind of goes up from trained to legendary in Pathfinder 2nd. It winds up being weirdly close to their standardized 2 plus a quarter of your level.
Yeah, it does.
Skill points, which lets you be a little more granular on how you assign your skills. In case you didn't want to just optimize them and you want to assign a bunch of expert skills, it gives you more points for that than assigning all the way up to legendary, because it's maybe not as strong of a play. And then stamina, where you get a pool of stamina points that help you recover your hit points without magical healing or medicine, just by kind of resting, but those are also points that you can't get back through magical healing, so you have 2 different pools. And those are the variant rules that just flat out exist directly in chapter 4.
So some of the patterns that you see in these, there's things that are about having more granularity or more like little options along the way, more toggles that you're playing with in the system. So things like free archetype, or like using skill points instead, so you can mess with things on a slightly more fiddly level. And then there were also the ones that are more about reducing the dependency on items in some way. And was another big thing. It's like, you've got automatic bonus progression, or reducing the number of magic items, or things like that. So in a lot of cases when you're choosing that you're going to use one of these, some of them are going to be about the setting and trying to
Scott wonders if granularity should be siloed.
There you go. So some of them are about, like, you're looking at the rules and you're looking at your game and you're thinking, well, my setting's a bit lower magic than the Pathfinder setting, or than like sort of the default Galarian Pathfinder setting. How can I modify the rules to work with that?
So that's actually a good starting point for the anatomy of an alternate rule. Also, hi to Azariad and to Yellowclad King, who says that they're a longtime fan, first time watching live. Glad you could make it. So, Linda...
Yes, Elf gave us some.
Linda has recognized the first thing that you want to have before you make a variant rule. It's somewhat like a concept that we always say are what you start with in a lot of other things. But for a variant rule, you have like a need. Identify a need for a variant rule.
So something
you shouldn't
that's in the
necessarily
rules that
make a variant rule just arbitrarily because like, well, I'll just do it. But if you have a need for a variant rule, something like you said, something in the rules that doesn't work for your group, something that you want to tweak for your setting because one of the part of the core assumption of the rules just doesn't work in your setting or messes with the genre of this particular campaign, even if it's not just your setting. For example, if your genre wanted to have more stamina pointsy one where people catch their breath and then are ready to go, as opposed to like being bandaged or healed with healing magic, then even if the setting doesn't always have stamina points, maybe this one campaign that is in that genre that's in your big kitchen sink setting would use stamina points to fit that out. So if you identify a need, such as more leshies from the chat, although is that really a variant, points out Dexstar Glow, then once you have a need for this variant rule, then the next thing that you want to do is try to figure out how you can fulfill that need with a variant rule that will cause the fewest amount of side effects throughout the rest of the game. And in order to do that, you identify the need and then identify exactly what the current rules actually are. Yes. That is an important part of the anatomy of a variant rule.
Because one thing is that, you know, if you're familiar with other games, it's very easy to assume that certain things are in there that aren't actually in there.
Yes, so part of the variant rule, even though it doesn't appear in the variant rules chapter, is always the actual original rule. That's part... It's not always posted with the variant rule, but it's part and parcel of the anatomy of it. And Zarian is asking where our old Arcade Mark episodes are on YouTube, since the last video was posted 11 months ago. It was posted 11 months ago, but it was actually like 2 or 3 years old.
The answer is taking up like a terabyte of space on my Dropbox.
Yes. Someday, maybe when we're
all settled in the new place.
When we're settled in, we can find it an easier time to do it. Like,
but we keep saying someday, and then it's just like, oh my gosh, some other thing happens.
Maybe when we're settled in, we'll have like a computer that we're not using, for example. Yeah. And we'll have space to just put it in and leave it uploading things to YouTube.
Yeah, like if we had space to have a desktop computer, we could totally do that much more easily than.
For example.
Right now. Yeah.
Right, so we'd be possibly able to do that. That's true.
Because, like, honestly, one of the biggest stumbling blocks is just literally the physical, like, fact that YouTube takes forever to upload videos.
Yeah, it takes hours. Like, over an hour to upload, like, one video. So, if you want to upload a lot of videos, that's your day. Even then, you kind of have to camp it, because it might be like, oh, well, you know, we're maybe going to switch over, press OK. So, You kind of have to camp it, but if you have like a leftover computer that's only doing that, that would definitely be more helpful. So back to variant rules. You need to have a need for a variant that fits your genre, your campaign, or your gameplay that your table enjoys. Then you need to know exactly what the actual rule already says. Then I would recommend that you also play with the regular rule even more than you already have. Like, toy with it, play with it, even possibly run a few playtests with the rule as it normally is, watching the boundaries of that rule. Maybe you've played the campaigns enough in the game system that you're playing in. This isn't just for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, this is for any RPG. Maybe you've already played enough to do it without this, and I don't always follow this same rule that I just said here of playing it multiple times. I will readily admit that after having done enough professional game design and Linda having done professional game development, there were times when we were like playing a World of Darkness campaign and we could just tell reading the rule without even playing it once that it was just completely busted.
And we're
just like, okay, what are we going to actually do instead of that? And then we fixed it, and so we didn't follow my advice on variant rules because we made a change without actually playing it. We kind of did, though,
because what we would do then is that we would be like, okay, we know this isn't going to work for us. Let's talk over what we might replace it with. Okay, this sounds legit. Then let's assess, how did that work? Okay, that was in the right direction. Let's move it a little farther forward. Or, okay, we went a little too far. Let's pull it back.
So iterating is important because you should probably play with the regular rule. unless you have a very strong reason to know that it's definitely not going to work, or maybe literally
yeah,
non-functional.
Or for example, like let's say that you're like, I know I want to have a low magic campaign, so like it's not gonna work to start by playing.
There's no reason to play the high magic campaign for a low magic game, but you should still play it because you want to see, if you can, if you have time, you should try to play the high magic campaign to see what magic is doing and what linchpins it's holding up. As opposed to, like, you buy the book, you kind of vaguely read it over and like, alright, I'm going to do low magic.
Yeah.
So even though you did use that as a suggestion of one that you wouldn't have to play, I think it would be better if you did.
Yeah, if you could play like a module, like a few sessions with more standard stuff, and then get into that.
That'll give you a sense of like, okay, these are the pillars I'm removing.
I was thinking about it from the perspective of like trying that campaign with that particular role. I was like, oh, that would be disruptive.
Oh yeah,
right?
You wouldn't want to do the whole campaign.
First, yeah.
Just maybe a few playtest sessions is all I'm asking. You don't have to though. I mean, it's up to you. This is a design diary, so it's sort of assuming that you're going at least like a little semi-professional designer, and you may be releasing this online. If this is just for your home group, then you can do whatever you want. Even then, I think that more knowledge is more power when making a variant rule.
Yeah, I think another question too is like, do you need a variant rule, or is this more of a thing that a subsystem can handle? Like, is this something that is a sort of an isolated thing where it's like, oh yeah, for this encounter, this small section, I want something different to happen. I want to handle this particular mechanic in a more abstract way. In a lot of cases, you can just have a subsystem do that instead of saying we're going to fundamentally change the mechanics of the game.
Sure,
so,
definitely.
Yeah, so usually you're going to want, if you're asking for a variant rule, it's like there's something that's fundamental to the game that over the long arc of the character's story, you're going to want to change.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you've started out, you had a need for a variant rule. Then you read exactly what the rule currently is. You've played a few times with that while analyzing what that rule is currently doing. Well, maybe you weren't able to. Hopefully you were. Next, what you need to iterate is try to find an elegant and parsimonious approach to creating a variant rule that does not ramify out into a bunch of other things, but simply makes the changes that are needed to the rule that you want to change. And if there aren't any dominoes that you noticed when you were playtesting it or looking at it carefully, that you handle the dominoes so that there isn't a lot of fallout that heads out of other places. So for instance, with alignment variants, you could just print something that said remove alignment, and then that's it. That's all. That's parsimonious, all right. But since I read into the system a lot, and I knew, oh wait a minute, there's a few things we're gonna have to worry about, because there's damage that's good, evil, chaotic, and lawful, and there's some creatures with weaknesses to that damage, and there's traits of that are in spells that sometimes tell you who can use that spell or not. So therefore, the alignment variance is not just remove alignment variant over, but instead talks about how to deal with those ramifications.
And then when you talk about things like magic item variants or automatic bonus progression, things where you're removing numbers that are built into the system, you're going to want to find some way to build those numbers back up, because if you just take down some numbers, then that has like huge ramifying effects on the entire system. You can't just say, oh well, if the PC's accuracy goes down, then like the enemy's accuracy goes down, and like there's a lot of numbers, accuracy versus armor class, and spell DC versus saving throws, and all sorts of things that all connect together. So generally, if you can find some way to build back up to the system's expected numbers at a lot of different checkpoints, and say, okay, yeah, this is going to be the same at level 1 and level 5 and this kind of thing, and is the closer it maps, the easier it'll be to make it work.
That's right. As Zari had given an example of something that has many ramifications, is making a mana system in Pathfinder or 5e that's trying to replace slot-based casting. Yeah, that would have massive ramifications. No matter what you do, even if you touch the the source of all knowledge in the universe in order to create the exact perfect mana cost that was exactly right for every spell level and was balanced between the value of those spells, it's still going to be tempting to just cast only the highest level spells possible, run yourself out of mana almost immediately, and then force everybody else to rest for a day. which is going to throw off your rhythm and make spellcasters more powerful. And that's your best case scenario. You have other scenarios where you like made it so that those high level spells cost too much and nobody can even cast them, or if it does, then they get wrecked. You can make them cost too little so that that strategy that I just mentioned becomes even more obscenely the dominant strategy, and it gives tons of longevity to a spellcaster while casting their strongest spells. So those are all the kinds of things you want to look into, and you have to be at some level willing to accept certain side effects as inevitable. For example, the mana side effect is that there's no way that you're not going to have spellcasters who are just casting strongest, being stronger than you would have expected or maybe necessarily ideally wanted them to be, and then running out and telling everyone, we've got to rest now, I don't have anything left.
Yeah, I could see like maybe some kind of like a system where it's like where you have like a recharge time or something like that, and it's like, oh yeah, you know, you can, but then you have to like, I guess, try to figure out how to justify that.
You mean
like,
a recharge on casting high level slots, or sorry, not slots, but you're casting your strongest spells. You could do something like that, but at that point, it's not even just a mana system. That has additional implications, which I really like. In fact, in the alpha for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, when we were just throwing spaghetti on the wall, one idea that I threw on the wall that, like, never made it off the wall or maybe fell down, I don't know, what's the good thing to happen when you throw spaghetti on the wall? Whatever the bad thing is.
Yeah.
Was an idea of, like, what if you had a spellcaster, like, you decided, like, druids tap into ley lines around the world, and so, like, they have to build up in a fight towards using their highest level slots, but have more of them or something like that than other people, but their limitation is their anti-nova, for example. They're doing something and toying around with spellcasting like that. I think it could be great. But just purely going into a mana system is going to cause you those issues.
Oh, I was thinking something where, like, you know, let's say that you have a mana pool and your mana pool can only hold like 10 mana at a time, and then it takes some time to regenerate. So like, you're not completely done for the day, but you still have, like...
Oh, so that is something that I've also seen, which is, like, kind of refresh/refocus based on spell slots. You could try to do that, and I'm using Pathfinder 2nd as an example here. This is going to cause you huge problems if you try to do that, because there are many spells that are balanced around the fact that they're using up a daily resource and they have a duration that is focused on that. So, for example, let's suppose it took 10 minutes to get back however many of your points are. Then all of your daily and hour-long spells are suddenly just free casts, because you just cast them and then get all of your points back, and it didn't cost you any resources. So, there's a lot of give and take when you're coming up with a variant rule, as we can see just here on the camera. As we're doing it together ourselves.
Now I'm thinking about, like, what if you had a system where, like, every time you did that, though, like, you got a little weaker for the day or whatever, but then I guess people would then want to go back and rest to get back to their Nova seats.
Right, and if they only got a little weaker for the day, then it still might be worth it to get those day-long, high-level effects.
Yeah. I could see maybe doing something where when you did that refresh, any of your active durations ended.
You could do that. Then, on the other hand, if it was just that, like, you could only cast one spell, then you have to refocus, that would make it so you can't use those high-level spells, because then you basically aren't able to do anything else. So it's very tricky, as you can see.
Or maybe whenever you have one of those active, it's still active, so it keeps using that portion of your pool.
Right. The problem is that if your pool was small enough that it only fits one top level spell, and then you have to rest, like you were saying, you can do 10 levels of spells, and you cast a 9th or 10th level spell, then those long duration ones would just basically be out of the question, except for an NPC, because of the fact that, you're not doing anything else while that's active. So it's tricky. And you could do something like that if you made a class that only used instantaneous spells, like, basically was constantly just, like, blasting and maybe healing if you were paying attention carefully to what you did with that. You could make a class that completely was balanced based on that, because all the effects happened in the moment. And so you can figure out moment to moment, round to round, minute to minute, how much they can do.
Oh yeah, that would totally work. Yeah, I'm just having fun, I'm just having fun riffing on this and thinking about, hey, what would happen if you did this or this?
Yep. So this is the fun of variant rules: is you have to come up with side effects, consequences. Think of what you can change it. Sometimes you wind up with something that's different than what you thought you were going to start with. So those are all important to a variant rule. Those are the basic fundamental building blocks. And I've seen that we have some questions in here, such as Kitchev asking, are there any variants you can't live without? I would say that there are no variants that I can't live without. Like, I like the variants. I mean, I wanted to write the variant rules chapter because I was excited about variants, and some of the ones I put in there were just blatantly... I finished the variant that I was requested to write in less space than the amount of space that I had, so I put in some other variants that I wanted to add in as well.
I mean, I've certainly enjoyed playing with free archetype, although arguably my character with free archetype is weaker for having free archetype because I went out of my way to redistribute her ability scores in a suboptimal way to take the archetype. But yeah,
I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily true, because I could claim that Olivia has her intelligence at a weirdly high amount, but she has to take Investigator.
Mm-hmm.
Except Lucia has her intelligence to an amount neither of us knows why it is, and is
why.
not required to take Bard multi-class.
I honestly don't know why. I think that there's some chance that I just misentered it when we were putting
Instead
into
of Wisdom.
Fantasy Grounds.
I think that's possible.
And then I wasn't going to go back and
when you put
retcon
that
it whenever
from Fantasy Grounds
to
Foundry or whatever, actually, maybe it was only in Foundry.
Yeah. So, right, when I was putting into Foundry from other stuff, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's possible. So, basically, that's what we're looking at when we're building a variant rule. So, again, you have to figure out what the need for the variant rule is. Like, what is the cause? What is the need? What is this going to do? Be an expert on the rule as it is currently written. Why it does what it does. Exactly what it does. Play it out most likely if you can. Then come up with as elegant of an approach as you can to replace the basic rule with your variant rule while dealing with any fallout that your variant rule might cause that is unintended. And maybe the fallout isn't unintended. Like, maybe you want to, like, maybe you're like, I wish that spellcasters could only make it through one battle with about 5 rounds, and then that's it. But they cast all their most powerful spells on every round. And then the PCs rested for the day after each fight. And spellcasters were more effective during a fight. We're always casting their strongest thing. Like, that could be actually your intended purpose. In which case, that's not a side effect you have to deal with in a mana system.
Let's say that you're like, I just want a game where everyone's playing spellcasters, and like there's maybe not a ton of spellcasters around, and spellcasters are really powerful, and I want my PCs to feel like they're really powerful and special and awesome.
Then you could make a variant that is even more powerful than that. Like, that mana variant doesn't make them that much more powerful. It just kind of does something that the basic system thinks are as negative in 2 ways. One of which is letting them be at their strongest all the time, and the second of which is forcing everybody to rest constantly after a Nova. It basically Novas out all their power in one short period of time.
But like, some groups might enjoy a more Nova-based playstyle.
That might be what you want. So you need to take into account what you do want and what you don't. Yellowclad King is wondering how I feel about certain variants such as free archetype becoming quote standard in practice to some groups rather than a deviation from the standard design. I think that's fine if that's what people want to do. I love free archetype. That's why I wrote free archetype. Everyone on the design team was in favor of free archetype. Some of those other variants that I added in there, like Ancestry, Paragon, and dual class, that was just on me. But free archetype was one that everybody on the design team were simultaneously like, this is going to be so cool. You could just have everyone get pirate for a pirate campaign. And like, maybe some of the like unlimited free archetype take the strongest archetype, while like where I can take Beastmaster while Linda takes Investigator and then nerfs her Oracle in the same campaign. Maybe those are things some of the other designers might not have been thinking of as much of as when they were all really excited about everyone could take pirate for a pirate campaign or something like that. But I think that everyone's happy if you're happy adding in a free archetype on your character.
So there's a question about resonance and a suggestion that maybe it should have been put in as a variant instead of removed completely.
No, I don't think it could have. It either needed to be in the game or not. The problem with variant rules that are something that's a fundamental aspect of the game, and let me explain what resonance is for our viewers who don't know, because we're also talking in general, but this is a very Pathfinder 2 specific question. So resonance was an ingenious rule, in my opinion, in the playtest that Logan Bonner created to try to deal with the paradox of consumable items, where a lot of people hoard consumables, but they unfortunately, as the price of items increases as levels go up exponentially, they become eventually 0 gold piece cost. So you need to assume that a higher level character can have thousands of these potentially. They probably don't need more than hundreds to use it all the time. And it won't even budge their budget with thousands or hundreds for a slightly higher level item. So he came up with this idea: what if there's resonance? It fit in with some of the lore of the world that had existed even in Pathfinder First Edition, where the idea is there's only a certain amount of uses of magical items that your body and spirit can take in a short period of time. That would allow you to make really interesting and stronger consumables because of the fact that even if you're level 20, that you did not have the case where you would have to buy 1,000 of these 1 minute items and drink them every minute of the entire dungeon. So, however, it was, as mentioned in the comment, it was I wouldn't even say universally hated. It was disliked by enough people that even when we put in a variant to it, there was no consensus on what people wanted, and people were generally negative towards it, so it was removed. The problem is, at that point, we made sure none of the consumables were as unabusable as possible, given that you could have thousands of them, other than the fact that there were still spell scrolls, and having thousands of certain spells is going to be abusable. And so we didn't make consumables that were based around resonance, and so therefore that meant that making a variant that adds resonance might require retooling every consumable item in the game.
So in a resonance variant, you would see a significant, probably a drop in an item, consumables becoming cheaper and more powerful because then the resonance acts as the counterbalance weight. And also being allowed to branch into a broader range of rules items.
Yeah, basically yes. Also, JBit Razor is wondering if the need to kit out underlings and hirelings takes budget away. Unfortunately, not. If you did have underlings and hirelings that were taking a lot of a PC's budget, that would hurt their ability to buy the new on-level items that they need for the game. It wouldn't stop them from buying items that buying 1,000 of it they don't bat an eye because each one costs 1 gold piece, and the item they're looking to buy is 20,000 gold pieces. So
generally, the assumptions for how much gold the PCs have is more about their own personal wealth. But a lot of published Pathfinder adventures and other adventures have subsystems that are running in the background that represent some kind of organization that you're leading or part of or something like that in their prosperity. And I'd recommend using something like that to represent a group that your PCs are working with, because then they sort of have this separate pool of resources that is being used for your allies.
Yes, the Game Master Guide suggests that if you have an organization or something like that that has some money sink purposes, that it also produces value at least at an equal amount to the value that it takes away or the times it causes trouble for the PCs, so that that the PCs will not resent it.
Yes.
And Kitchef, I do think that Resonance was misunderstood. I think it was an ingenious idea because it thought outside the box of what otherwise is just a trap that every tabletop RPG ever has fallen into, of how are you going to deal with these consumables and the fact that they can be stockpiled? And even PF2 falls into it. Eventually, you reach the point where, if not 9th level heroism scrolls, then 6th level heroism scrolls are cheap enough that you can just have them for every moment of the adventuring day. When your 10 minutes run out, you're really okay, we'll pop another 6th level heroism scroll. And that's not a good thing for the overall situation, and Resonance could have helped with it. So it is what it is. It's not like a game breaker to Pathfinder 2. Pathfinder 2 works well, but I think it would have worked better with some version of Resonance, but that wasn't what people wanted to play. Yeah. And ultimately, a game that people enjoy playing is more important than a game that helps deal with problems that maybe not every table actually faces. Elftro says, you would need consumable money and permanent money that were separate, and that would be weird. Yes, another way you can do it, by the way, would be to make it so that consumables used a different resource than money. Like, let's say you're in a world where you can't buy consumables at the market. You can only make them with herbs that are found, and the herbs were a separate currency that are used to make consumables. Or you had a situation where there was no such thing as a consumable magic item you can buy. Instead, you had you would have magic items that produce consumables each morning.
Yeah, like the gardens.
Like the gardens, which which I wrote for Treasure Vault, or Estus flasks. And so, but let's say that there was a limit to the number of those that anybody could have, that they're linked to you, and that it makes a certain number of consumables for you each morning, and there otherwise are never consumables. That's the way you could do it.
Sort of like how, like, if you're playing the alchemist class and you have a daily pool that you can make. Having some kind of a pool like that, one of the nice things about that is it also helps with the problem of, we're just going to hold on to these and hoard them until later, until we really need them, because it's kind of a use it or lose it type thing.
That's right. Elftro pointed out some of the people who answered the surveys at the time have moved on since then. That's true. As he read, points out players expect you can chug as many potions as you can, which can be problematic. Yes, and in fact, it's one of the refrains I've heard people say sometimes, which make me think, like, but did they really understand what Resonance was like going for? Where they were like, I was fine with Resonance on everything else except potions, but I didn't want it for that. Why couldn't they have kept it and not put it on potions? And when potions and consumables were like the poster child for it, they kind of liked having it on permanent items instead of a per day limit on the permanent item, which I think was also very cool. Having that limit, but like the potions were actually the flat out part of the point, and like maybe the answer would have been that to deal with a pretty substantial number of people who were like, I like Resonance actually, but not for potions, when potions were the point. Making like a potion miscability or constitution based, your stomach can only deal with a certain number of potions. Like, that's something I have legitimately seen in many media that involve magic potions in large numbers. Like, almost any time there's a situation where people get sick because it's like, this is just too much water. Even the water in the potion is too much for your body to be drinking that often. Or that just the magic from the magic potions make you sick. So I definitely have seen that in media, and maybe there was another way to go about it, using Constitution for the potions or something like that, but that would be a pretty bespoke variant rule. And regardless, it would need to be baked into the system, I think. If you made it a variant, you would need to tweak so many parameters of everything else.
So I think that speaks to another thing about variant rules, is having them generally try to reach back to the baseline. And if you're looking at the variant rule and you're like, I need to alter all these, if it has all these ramifications that are gonna need to change like tons and tons of stuff, then
yeah, absolutely. So that's one thing to take into account when you're making a variant rule. So let's see, do we have any other questions from folks on variant rules? Otherwise, I think we followed the anatomy of a variant rule from start to finish, although there is one last thing, which, Linda, you alluded to earlier on, which is, once you've done it, and you've written your parsimonious rule, and you've dealt with the corner cases, you've got to play with the variant rule, and then bring your group together afterwards, talk about how it went. See, you watch how it went too, if you're the GM, see if it did what you wanted to, if it had unintended side effects that did something you did not want, and iterate. Let your players know before you put in a variant rule that this is a variant, and that this is tentative, and that you will be considering tweaking it if it causes problems for them that you weren't expecting.
And then you can get players,
maybe the opposite. Maybe it's too strong for them, and then get their feedback, make adjustments, iterate until it's exactly the way that you and your group like it, and that might take a few tries.
And it may even be that something that works well at low levels, once you get to higher levels, it starts to show issues or whatever, because it was like, oh yeah, this was balanced at this point, but then when the numbers change in this way, or like, oh, we're now dealing with more powerful spells, and then it might require a change farther down the road, or it might require a tweak that is based on how it deals with some corner case that you didn't really think of.
That's right.
Until later.
So, like, for example, with Linda and I, when we were making adjustments in World of Darkness, to people who make a large number of attacks.
Mm-hmm.
We made an original adjustment and that worked okay, but then we eventually reached a point where a lot of people had the ability to AoE give a bunch of attacks,
Mm-hmm.
and we created a new variant of our rules on it, which, for the record, are that if you can get a whole bunch of actions or attacks, everyone takes their first one in initiative order, and then their second one if they still have extra ones left over, and so on, rather than just like, oh, I went first, I will now make 20 attacks, now I'm done.
Yeah, so then it's everyone's first attack, then all the people have a second attack, they take second attack, and third attacks, and so on. So that way, like, you certainly still have an advantage if you have more attacks than everyone else, but you're not like, oh, I'm a werewolf and I went first, good night.
Yes. So that is what we eventually came out with, and it was a lot more satisfying and less like swingy to the initiative roll than it would have been otherwise. And otherwise, it would have just been a situation where somebody who can tweak their initiative to go first and make all of their attacks is just gonna kill the other person just right away. So that's an example of something that wasn't in Pathfinder Second Edition that we made a variant roll.
It's especially interesting too because a lot of times when you have like the person who's making a ton of attacks in that system, their attacks are just like basic attack. So, but the people who are taking only one action, they might be doing like some kind of like a magical effect or some other big thing that's going on. So there is that sense where, you know, the making a bunch of attacks is certainly powerful, but people are going to have a chance to respond before you do all of the other attacks to try to do something defensive or try to do something interesting.
So their big spell is all going to go off on their first turn.
But that also means that since that went off, once all these other attacks are going through, like sometimes when you're playing the person who casts the big spell, you're like, oh my gosh, so much has happened and I can't respond.
I can't respond. When do I get to go again? When do I get to go again?
Yep.
Yep. So that worked for us, and that our same solution to that may not work for you, even in the same system. It all depends on your group and your needs and what the meta is and what the campaign is. So that's the anatomy of a variant rule, starting from identifying a problem or an opportunity, and going down to iteration and refinement of the variant rule all the way at the end of the process. Thanks for joining us on Design Diaries Anatomy of a Variant Rule. Let's say goodbye to YouTube and then do our outro.
Bye, YouTube.
Bye, YouTube. See you next time.